Madam Toastmaster, fellow Toastmasters, most welcome guests. Today I'm going to tell you about myself. And thinking about this, I thought that the best place and the most important thing I've done recently was a trip I took to the Himalayas last year. I went to Nepal for 3 months to trek the Great Himalaya Trail. Started off in Kathmandu and ended up in Hilsa on the western border with Tibet 3 months later. Very dirty, 22 pounds lighter, and thinking, change? What change? Because before I left, I thought that I'd come back this completely transformed person, maybe ready to take on the world, a new role. Who knew? But I found that actually I didn't come back changed, other than the weight loss. And also, when I got home, all my friends said to me, so how was it? And I told them about it. And how did you change? I don't think I did. But looking back, I think actually the change had happened before I left for Nepal, for if it hadn't, I'd never have gone on that journey. Years ago, probably 15 years ago or so, if not longer, obviously it's hard to pinpoint change because it happens very gradually. But many, many years ago, I was the sort of person who'd sit on the sidelines. I was the person who was paddling in the shallow end of the swimming pool. Fast forward to now, and I'm the person who climbs mountains and who's even thinking about open water swimming. Who knew? So how did this change come about? Those are the things that I want to tell you about today. I think the first thing was my divorce. Now, divorce is not a good thing, generally. Generally, most people, pretty much everyone, suffers in the process, both people and children if they're involved. But actually, it can be quite transforming, and I found that in my case, having to step out, move from being a housewife to being someone who had to get a job and look after 2 kids, who were at different schools, do the school run, as well as try and advance in my career. I grew a lot, and I went from being a temp to being project manager, sourcing manager for telecoms at Network Rail. Don't blame me about the trains, not really. So divorce had that impact, but also what it gave me was, going out into the world led me to meeting so many people that I'd never have met. I think it's very unlikely I'd have been here with you today if I'd still been in my marriage. And I think it's totally unimaginable that I would have been climbing mountains and doing the things that I'm doing now. So thank you, ex-husband, for that. The second thing I want to tell you about is about a friend of mine. She was called Lashini. I met her through work, again, this contact I've made at work. She worked in the German branch of the company I was working for. And we became really good friends because we were both single mothers with children of the same age, and we decided we were going to go to her home in South Africa on holiday. And then all of a sudden she disappeared from work. Her boss rang me to tell me that she'd been taken ill. And then one day I was at home with my daughter when I got this phone call. I was taking my daughter to see the Spice Girls, something I was really dreading. And I got this phone call from Lashini telling me that she was going home to South Africa to die. She'd been diagnosed with terminal lung cancer, very aggressive. She was given 3 months to live. In fact, she died 3 weeks later. But the last thing she said to me was, you never know how long you have in this world. Make the most of it, and don't let life pass you by. Anything you want to do, just go for it. And I went to the Spice Girls concert, and as my daughter jumped around, I stood there, tears streaming down my face. But I always held on to that, and quite often I forget, but once in a while I come back to that memory that I shouldn't let life pass me by, and that's the way I try to live. The third thing I want to tell you about is my back operation. About 4 years ago, I had an operation on my spine because I was in a lot of pain, and I had a disc replaced in my back. My parents were terrified at the prospect of me undergoing this because they imagined the worst, I'd be paralysed, and I suppose that was a possibility. But for me, it was a chance to do things that I wanted to do, to be physical again. And when I woke up in the hospital, I said to my parents, I'm going to climb Kilimanjaro. And my mum said, oh no. But I did. 4 months later, I did. That was my target because that was how I started walking again, from being prone for 6 weeks to walking again and then climbing mountains, and that's where my love of mountains came from. And so the message I have for you, the thing I have learned really, is that change happens gradually. It's not something that you can force. So all those nights I spent in my tent thinking, I've got to change, I've got to change, I've got to change, didn't happen. And maybe I will find out in a year's time, 6 months maybe, that I did change. But the changes would have been very subtle. Thank you.